Youth sports can be really hard, especially if you're wanting to raise your kid in ways that produce healthy adults when they're done playing. Each week on Healthy Sports Parents, we have conversations designed to help you keep your athlete mentally and emotionally healthy. Whether you're just starting out in rec ball or you're traveling every weekend to elite tournaments, we're here to help you strengthen your relationship with your kids through sports. If we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Carone, and I'm the host of the show. Today, we're joined by doctors Lauren Sibley and Levi Kerby from Kinetic Performance and Rehab. Both are physical therapists with orthopedic specialties. KPR is a fitness-forward rehab practice with a focus on helping people train not just for the sport they're playing today, but also for an active, healthy life as adults as well. They're not your traditional rehab office where you just drop in for 20 minutes and they send you on your way. Speaking from experience myself, they are both doctors who truly care about making sure you're healthy and able to live and perform in the best possible ways. Let's welcome in Dr. Lauren and Dr. Levi. And we're here with Dr. Levi and Dr. Lauren. Guys, thanks for so much for joining us. Go ahead and say hey to everybody.
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
So I spent 10 weeks with you all earlier, actually it was into 2024, basically recovering from a knee injury. And I learned a lot. So when I started getting questions about overuse and injuries, I knew I wanted to come to you guys because I trusted you and I trust your approach to these things. So one of the big things that parents are facing today is the push from youth coaches to specialize in individual sports, whether it's playing soccer all year round. I'm actually hearing a lot from hockey players and hockey parents that I didn't realize that I would get that type of audience, but hockey kids are pushed to play year round. But baseball and volleyball, there's a push from coaches to specialize in the sport at young ages and play the same thing year round. Parents are told if your kid doesn't do this all year round, they're going to fall behind. They're not going to be able to reach whatever it is your goal is in the future. But at the same time, you've got physical therapists, strength coaches, Division I coaches, like people who have been there before also saying that kids need to diversify their movements and play multiple sports. And it's led to a lot of confusion for parents. But what we do know is that through the rise of specialization, we're seeing a rise in overuse injuries for young kids that we didn't see in the past. Can you all tell us about some of the physical dangers of overuse and doing the same movements over and over?
Yeah, so I think generally overuse is going to be caused from doing the same movement pattern over and over, whether that's a golf swing or in hockey skating or an overhead throwing athlete. I think the big focus there is to train other movement patterns as well, which we'll get into. But my next big advice for parents is to focus on rest. You can only physically benefit from what you can recover from. So if you're practicing, 4 or 5 days a week and you have a game another 1 to 2 days a week, well, then you're doing those movement patterns every day. And if you're not getting good quality sleep, or good quality rest days, or good quality strength and conditioning days outside of practice and playing your sport, your body doesn't have time to rest and reset. And just hinting on the quality of sleep, being on your phone or iPad or whatever, scrolling TikTok and Instagram till 2:00 in the morning, they're not going to get good quality sleep if they're going to bed at 2 because they're on their phone all night. And then they wake up for school at 6, 7 o'clock the next morning, and then you're going back into practice. So when we sleep, our brain has time to reset, and those movement patterns that you've learned in practice or in a game, they kind of have time to ingrain in your brain and make you a stronger, better athlete. So I think the big focus on resting, on having rest days and getting good quality sleep. And I know we're going to talk about strength and conditioning a little bit later and the importance of that, but I think that's kind of my big advice.
Yeah, I'll chime in here a little bit too. I think one of the big issues here, and it may be hard for people to conceptualize on a podcast, so I'll try to break it down. But, there are 3 cardinal planes of movement. So we're talking about sagittal plane. Think about front to back. Think about a cross-country athlete who is running basically linear all the time. There is the transverse plane. So think about rotation. Think about a baseball swing, a softball swing, a discus athlete. And then there is frontal plane. So we think of like a jumping jack or a lot of basketball lateral movements, hands overhead type of movements. And what happens when you don't specialize and you play multiple sports is you are exposed to the demands of activity and training in multiple planes. So And what happens is we don't develop this large asymmetry between the muscles that function primarily in a certain plane and the muscles that function in different planes. So like, let's say we're an athlete and we play baseball. It's going to be a lot of sagittal plane, a lot of transverse plane. Both of those things are great. But then we transition when we play basketball. Well, we're going to get a lot more frontal plane movement in basketball. And it makes for an athlete, it helps develop a lot of physical robustness because you are exposed to all these different stimuluses. And I see that over and over and over again in the clinic it is really true. We see a lot of athletes that are training year round in a certain sport. You mentioned hockey. I evaluated a hockey player 3 weeks ago, and I asked him, when's your off season? And then he's like, I play hockey all year round. I have 2 weeks off in the summer. And it's like, that's not enough, dude. That's not enough. That's not enough of an off season. You need to reevaluate some things.
What was he dealing with because he wasn't having an off season?
He had long-standing back pain and a hamstring strain. But it was not just that. He's playing hockey year round, and he's also playing some other sports on top of hockey. So there are periods of the year, most of the year, where he's playing 2 or 3 sports at the same time, 6 days a week, and the volume is just too high. Like, you can be a professional athlete and you are not playing at high intensity 6 days a week without a substantial off season. So if you're playing in the NFL, if you're playing in the MLB, you still have an off season. You still have a designated time of the year to reset, to rest, to train for the demands that your sport is going to place on you. But for some reason, we think that, if you're 12 or 14, you don't need that. And I think I don't think that's true.
Lauren, I know you're a golfer, and that's kind of your background. One of the things I hear from parents is that some of those individual skill sports, the golf, the tennis, the things that have more intricate, like tiny detail skills, are the ones that if you take a season off of golf to go play soccer, then you're going to fall behind more, is the thing that parents or coaches would say. In your experience as the golfer, are you falling behind so much, or is your body not recovering because you're playing too much? Where's the balance there?
I think about the pros, okay? They play, they'll play a practice round Wednesday, Thursday, and they'll play the season, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and 18 holes of golf every day. But their rest days, all they do is train their muscles and do strength and conditioning. So I think it's having a balance of playing your sport. And if you go play another sport, you don't stop your strength and conditioning. You can still work those planes of movement. You can still work rotation, especially with golf. You still need to work on your hip mobility, your spine mobility. You still need to work on all that, but that doesn't mean that you can't run and cut in soccer. And so I think making sure that your strength and conditioning training wise is staying up is the key, and you're not just playing sports. I mean, I have so many golfers on my schedule right now, and most of them have back pain. And I ask them what their training schedule is like, and they're like, oh, well, I hit the course, after work, and that's it. They don't go to the gym. They don't do a lot of strength and conditioning. And so I think that's the big key there.
So if we're trying to find the balance, let's say that we believe you should be specializing in a sport. Let's just make that assumption real quick. What's the balance between playing and training? Because if we're playing, how much should we, like, you both mentioned off seasons, you've both mentioned strength training. So we can focus on a sport, but how do we balance the training so that we're not overusing the muscles and injuring them at young ages?
Man, I think that's a loaded question because it's unique to the athlete. So I believe this from the bottom of my heart, that there is no movement pattern. There is nothing that is inherently bad for us. We label certain things as bad. It's simply just things that you are prepared for and things that you are physically unprepared for. So for example, I've been training for an endurance trail race. So if I had to go run a road marathon tomorrow, I would be ready. I'm ready to run one. Lauren is not training for a road marathon. So if she went and ran a road marathon tomorrow, she would be at substantially higher risk of injury than I would, because I've put in the amount of time, the months to prep for some of these things. So I think it largely depends on the physical preparation of the athlete. So if they are 10, their physical preparation for high volume, high intensity sports is probably fairly low because they are 10 years old. So my focus would be more on we're really only playing at intensity less frequently, and we're doing more training. Now, if you are, let's say, 17 and you've been playing at a high level for a long time and you've really put a lot of training in, your ability to handle intensity, frequency is probably much higher because of the amount of work and the effort that you have put in. But that is a very individual based question, and I would say that is also up to the parent to have conversations with their kids on how are you feeling. If you're feeling like you got hit by a bus every day, you're looking for some signs of overtraining? Are we having these naggy aches and pains that we keep talking about every other week? It's like, man, my knee hurts. These are warning signs that we need to reevaluate the schedule, or we need to reevaluate some intensity.
So you're saying that popping ibuprofen before you play every single day probably is a sign that you're not training your body enough to be playing as much as you're playing.
Probably a red flag, yeah.
Okay. Not that I've seen that on the baseball field or anything before. It's like kids coming up, hey, can I have 4 ibuprofen before they go out and play a game? It's just I've seen that since I was growing up, that like we're gonna pop the pill so we can go out and play. Even if it's just ibuprofen, that's not a healthy thing to do over and over and over. But like you can see how if your body's not handling it and you're needing the ibuprofen to go out and play, then maybe we should scale some stuff back and do some training instead of sport practicing.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. When I first came to you all, it was after I got an MRI on my knee, and it showed evidence that I had something called OSD. And Lauren, you're smiling because you know I'm going to do this. Can you tell us what OSD is? Because I love the way you say it.
So I think I make it a little more German, and I kind of hawk in it, but it's Ausgutslaughters. I like to say Ausgutslaughters.
So I had never heard of OSD before this MRI. I got the MRI results back and it said evidence of OSD as a child. Now, I went to Dr. Google, and we all know Dr. Google's a bad thing. But for parents who have never dealt with this, can you all explain what OSD is and how prevalent you're seeing it in adults today from overuse in the past?
I mean, I even see it in a decent bit of kids. Most kids that come in and have any kind of front of the knee pain, it's probably from some kind of OSD formation. But basically what it is, it's an overtraining of your quads, and where your quads attach kind of in the bottom bone in your leg, it starts kind of pulling at that a little bit, and you get some extra bony growth there, and it just causes a lot of pain and inflammation. But as far as later in life, yeah, I mean, it definitely starts turning into, you start getting some knee OA, some patellofemoral pain. So it's pretty prevalent, I would say. What about you, Levi?
And I mean, I don't even think that it's just OSD. Like, I think there are a lot of injuries in kids that have impacts later down the road. And the reason I know that is because we treat all those people, so like I immediately think of ankle sprains. So like ankle sprains are relatively thought of as a minor injury. Okay. But an ankle sprain, depending on the grade, but if this is a grade 2 or a grade 3, an ankle sprain is a ligament tear. It's not a substantially minor injury, and it can run a big spectrum. But we kind of brush off some of these things. But when you actually look at the research, I can remember I read this article 3 or 4 years ago that I think it was 38% to 40% of people that have a grade 2, grade 3 ankle sprain don't do their due diligence on the rehab in the front end. 38 to 40% of those people can end up with chronic ankle instability and or chronic pain. And I've seen a lot of those patients in their 30s or in their early 40s. It's like, my ankle hurts all the time, and it's hurt for 10 years. And we've kind of traced some of those things back to, chronic ankle sprains, but never really did our due diligence on the rehab side, or we never did anything to address it because we were so concerned with getting back to sport as fast as we can. And I think there's a lot of maybe short-sightedness in that from the athlete. And I would have been the same way as an athlete. I want to go back and I want to play tomorrow. And I think that's where the parent has to just be knowledgeable and to step in and be like, hey, let's think about this for a little bit. Like, if we took 6 weeks off and we really did this right, it has the potential to have a positive impact, when you're 35. And I think that matters a lot.
So let's push into that a little bit, because we've all seen the parent on the sideline telling their kid to suck it up and get back in the game because they hurt their ankle or whatever the small injury can be. And I know this is individualized, but where's the line between pushing through a tweak that may have gotten hurt a little bit and risking an injury? And I know that's based on training. I know it's based on body composition. There's so many facets to that, but how, I don't want to say worried, how protective, how, fill in the adjective here, should we be of young kids and injuries because of long-term damage?
So I'll start, and then and then Lauren can kind of fill in. I definitely am not, advocating that you be a helicopter injury, parent. I think for the most part, kids are very resilient. And this if you've ever had a kid, it's like they heal at a rate that is frustratingly much faster than if you're 40 or you're 50. Like, kids are very resilient. So I would say there's a couple things to think about is duration. So if you're playing sports and, well, let's back up. Let's say trauma. So if it is traumatic, where we have an injury that we can trace back to, like, I did this, it hurt really bad, that's probably something you should get checked out. But if we feel a little beat up here, there, if we have soreness, if we have a little tweak here and there, I would say give it a little bit of time, because a lot of those things in kids will shake out in a few days. But if you're getting down the road a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and your kid keeps mentioning, hey, like, this hurts, that's when I would say it's time to get it checked out in some capacity. Lauren, what are your thoughts there?
I think my answer is kind of twofold. Piggybacking off, kids are very resilient. So when your kid comes to you and tells you that something hurts, that should immediately be a red flag. As adults, we develop an emotional response to pain. Pain is a sensory or an emotional response to a stimulus. Kids haven't really developed that emotional response to pain yet. They haven't figured out, every time I go downstairs, my knee hurts, so now I'm kind of iffy about going downstairs. Kids don't really have that. They don't have those experiences to develop that from. So when a kid says they're in pain, or if you notice that they're in pain, it's definitely something worth looking into. I think the second thing is education. I think if, the parent and the child have a educated conversation about, look, like, if your ankle is really hurting, if your knee is really hurting, if your back is really hurting, we could take, 2, 4, 6 weeks off, really get it better, and then you can train the rest of the season. Or if it's doing okay, you think you could push through, this may become an injury that prevents you from playing soccer or golf for the rest of your life. So I think it's kind of putting the ball in their court and giving them the educational background to kind of be a part of the conversation and help with the decision-making process.
And if you're really unsure, you can also just ask someone. So I have people that message me pretty much on a weekly basis of, hey, this happened either with myself or this happened with my kid. What do you think we should do? And 90% of the time it's like, hey, try this, do this, give it a couple days, and it's totally fine. It self-resolves. But if you don't know, find a friend, a family member that maybe has a specialty or as a medical provider, or just call an office. And, most people will talk to you. Like, I talk to people all the time and answer questions. And so if you're really unsure, just call somebody and ask.
I literally text Lauren this week because
Yes.
it's max week at the gym, and it's my first max week after coming to you guys. And so like 3 months ago, we were rebuilding my squat from the ground up because I was so out of whack in terms of off balance and knee strength. And so I did a weight and got it up easily and was going to the next weight. But when I went back to step back, my knee kind of buckled, and it was fatigue. It wasn't that the strength wasn't there. It was just I haven't built the stamina back up in that knee yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I texted her, and like, she cheered me on. And I was like, well, I want to see how deadlifts go later this week. And it was just, make sure you pump your glutes. Like, it was just, here's how you, she told me to pump my butt pretty much, which I thought was funny because I'm a child. But
You said pump your butt.
you told me to pump my butt, Lauren. So like, but it's what you're saying, Levi. It's that like, I have this relationship with the doctor now because I have been seen and we have gone through treatment together, that when something happens, I can just reach out and say, hey, this happened. And I didn't even have to ask if it was a problem because we'd had those conversations before. And it was preemptive from Lauren, like, hey, when you go do this in a couple of days, make sure you do this first so that you don't experience the same thing again. And I think what we're worried about too much is that we're going to bother the professional. Oh, I'm not going to call the doctor because my kid's foot hurts because I don't want to bother them. When in reality, most of you guys who are in this to help people not be hurt.
Yeah, I get people at the gym all the time. And I mean, anybody that's talked to me in the last year, I love this job. I love what I do. So if you stop me in the middle of the gym and you're like, hey, like my shoulder kind of hurts, or like, hey, my knee kind of hurts, 9 out of 10 times, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and help you. And if I don't do it right then and there, I'm going to do it after the workout's over. Like I generally want to help you.
So on that note, let's give some practical advice as well, because a couple weeks ago we had our friend Breland on of Ignite Performance, and we talked about the need for building power and training explosiveness and all those things. But for kids who are still growing, which is a large part of our audience, parents of kids going through puberty, middle school kids, like late elementary, early high school, those awkward years where the body is growing in really big ways. Breland mentioned there's a need for small muscle training for stability and those things. And we don't often think of stability muscles, but after spending so much time with you all focusing almost completely on those tiny little movements and stability muscles, that it was a harder workout doing those than a full workout training my entire body. Like, I'm feeling my knee is operating so much better than it was before. And it's mainly because of those small stability, annoying workouts that you don't see big movements in, you don't see big gains in, but I can feel them. For parents who either don't know anything about strength training or they don't know about the small muscles and the stability muscles and why they're so important, can you all give us a crash course on why we need to be focusing on those areas at times when normally we don't think about it?
Yeah. So small muscle stuff, it kind of goes back to some of the stuff we talked about before. So like planes of movement, but I think it's even more essential for kids, because I am such an advocate for strength and conditioning in kids. But if you look at research stuff, it should always be, especially when they're young, movement quality over, just moving weight or some things. So there should be this educational aspect of like, we want to teach kids to move well, right? To hinge, to squat, to do things, because those are our functional patterns that are useful for life. And some of these small muscles that we're training with a lot of proprioceptive stuff. So what I mean by that is the ability to balance on one leg, to use one leg to create hip rotation, ankle stability. All these things are really important for sport. They're really important for injury prevention. But also there are these things that just help us move better as a human being. And one thing that I'm really passionate about is helping people train and move throughout their lifespan. So at some point, we'll talk about this probably a little bit later, but at some point, sport is going to end for your child. It doesn't matter if they play 20 years in the NBA. Like at some point, their sport career is going to end, and we want them to be able to be really good functioning adults as far as human movement goes. And I think that's why focusing on some of these smaller things, especially when they're young, it's setting this foundation for movement that will follow them throughout their lifespan.
Yeah, and I think kind of what he was talking about with the reception, most training that kids will do either in school outside of a strength and conditioning coach, they're working on doing a squat, which should be a relatively simple move, but you've got to have so many small stabilization muscles working. And so I think that's kind of the important of either working with a PT, working with a strength and conditioning coach, working with a good trainer, is that they are able to recognize when your movement pattern is not ideal or is not, I don't want to say perfect because everybody moves so different, but is not efficient for your body type.
Well, I mean, Lauren, you were able to, when I first started squatting, when we were together, like you literally looked at me and could see that I was overcompensating on one leg because the other leg wasn't like, I didn't even realize under the bar that I was using more of my right leg than my left leg because I was naturally trying to protect something that didn't feel good in my body. But you were able to see that just from like 2 squats and show me what I needed to focus on so that I could begin building that back up. And I think it's so individualized at this point to go train on your own, to go like, I'm going to download a plan and do something in my garage. I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, that without help, it's hard to see the little things we can't see on our own.
We have a term, Lauren and I, for people that come into the office and they do not move well. So you ask them to do a squat, and they're like, there's people that you watch them squat, and you're like, oh my gosh, that hurts me watching.
Don't do it again.
Yes, we call those people motor morons, and that's not a derogatory term. It's just their awareness of their movement patterns is very low. So I think that the benefit of exposing kids to good quality or supervised strength and conditioning movement pattern type stuff is you're giving them reps, you're giving them experience with moving well with feedback. So when you are having someone outside of yourself to look at that and be like, hey, like this is really funky. Try doing it this way. And then they do it and it feels better and it looks better. And now there's this click inside of like, oh, this is actually how I do a single leg hinge, or this is actually how I rotate my trunk. And those things over time, they translate to life, obviously, but they also translate to sport. And obviously your reduction of injury, or you're at a reduced rate of injury if you move well and you move efficiently.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, with the overuse, with the lack of training, with all of the things we've talked about, kids are experiencing more injuries at younger ages now. We're seeing Tommy John and baseball players at the high school level more than we've ever seen. We're seeing ACL injuries in girls at younger ages than before. So when kids get hurt, even the sprained ankles like you're talking about, even the sore shoulders, like it can feel like we have to get back to the field as quickly as possible. But from a medical standpoint, can you all talk to us about the importance? We hit on it a little bit, but how to heal, the importance of healing both short-term and long-term, because it all feels so immediate right now. It feels like we have to get on the field by next weekend or else something's going to happen. And we can't see the forest of my kid's going to be an adult someday. They're going to have their own kids, and they want to, like, I want my kids to be able to be on the soccer field with their kids like I am with them. And I know how bad it hurts me sometimes right now at 38 from lack of training and some of these injuries that I rushed back from when I was a kid. So, like, can you talk to us about the importance of the rest, the healing, and all of those things so that we don't get in our 30s and it's like, oh, I can't lift my arm over my head anymore because I pitched 37 innings in a weekend when I was 12 years old?
Yeah. So a couple things here. One, maybe this is the medical provider in me, but one, each injury is unique. So there's no blanket statement that I could give on this podcast. It's going to be like, you got to wait, 23.32 days, and that's when it's okay to return to sport. But I think it is really important for parents to understand and have a long-term outlook. It's really important for parents to speak with medical providers, to be actively involved in this process. So let's talk about ACLs, because that's a big one. And the amount of ACL research out there is overwhelming. Like, we know so much stuff and we still do it so wrong. So like in regards to ACLs, for some reason we rush ACLs back to sport. And there's an ample amount of research out there to show that if you return to sport prior to 9 months post ACL, that your re-tear rate in that leg or in the other leg is 7 times higher than if you wait till after 9 months. So 1 in 3 kids that return to ACL prior to 9 months will re-tear. 1 in 3. So you're playing ACL Russian roulette, basically, if you do not wait. But also, if you are even more patient and you wait till after a year, that re-tear rate goes down even farther. But I've seen so many times in my career where you have a kid who really wants to return to sport, and their parent wants them to return to sport, and they get clearance from their surgeon at 6 or 7 months, and they go and they return to sport and they re-tear. And I'll just tell you from experience, there's nothing more sad than seeing a kid on a table for a second ACL tear. And it is just heartbreaking. So I think it is really, as a parent, just something to be aware of. Like, I need to do my due diligence of speaking with medical providers, having a conversation with a rehab provider of what's realistic and what is practical. Because I think if parents knew that your child was 7 times more likely to re-tear, 1 in 3 are going to re-tear returning prior to 9 months, I don't think any parent would make that decision. But I think it's just lack of, they maybe don't know because they're not asking, or we're not doing a good job as a medical community of communicating these risks, because there's not a parent that I know that would willingly accept that, but it happens all the time.
Yeah, and I think, kind of going back to the ACL stats, if you have something intra-articular, specifically in your knee, and there's lots of research that shows this, whether it's a meniscus, whether it's an ACL tear, you're at a significantly higher risk of developing knee OA or arthritis in your knee, which, eventually, if again, left untreated, you're looking at a joint replacement. So something that happened when you're 14, 15, 16 years old can again affect you in your 50s. So I think doing your due diligence in that time period, like, yeah, you're going to take a year off, but it's worth a year of your life when you're 14, 15, 16 versus the rest of your life from 45 on. And so I think kind of having that understanding can help you navigate that short-term and long-term performance.
How would you counsel a parent who is up against a coach who's trying to rush a kid back? Because the coach's team is going to perform better if Johnny comes back from injury a month or two, because sure, he looks okay now. Johnny at 70% is better than some of his kids at 100%. So he wants Johnny to come back early. Can you give the parents listening some type of advice? And Lauren, I see your face right now. You are, I feel like we're about to step on a soapbox with you on this. Like you're about to fight somebody. So I'm just going to shut up at this point. Like, just go, Lauren. Lauren, tell us what we need to know here.
I feel like that's the coach that doesn't care about the long-term outcome, which
unfortunately is a lot right now.
It's a lot.
If we're honest.
Yeah. I think you've got to have the kid's best interests at heart. And as a parent, that's a tough conversation to navigate. So yeah,
I think it's too. It's as a parent, it's playing the long game and understanding that if you want your child to be the best athlete that they can be, what gives them that best chance is being on the field and being healthy. So like there's sitting out 9 months to a year for an ACL, that's rough. Like, but what's much worse than that is doing it again. And now you've missed 2 years of your sport because you made bad decisions, 6 months out of this injury. And another little soapbox thing here, I think this is another plug for strength and conditioning, because so much on the PT side, especially the traditional PT side, post ACL, it's going to end, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. And you still have this gap between, you're kind of done with rehab, but you're not ready to go back to sport. And I think that's where it's really important with the parent, the therapist, and some sort of trainer, coach are working together to get that person ready for that 9 to 12 month window when they can go back and be ready. Because if you do your PT and then you do nothing for 4 or 5 months, you're still not ready to go back, even though it may be 9 months out.
Are you guys seeing any type of research or experience on how much, I don't say worse off, but like a second major traumatic injury like that? So a second ACL tear, a second shoulder injury, what are the chances that a kid fully bounces back at the same level if they get hurt that second time?
I think that's also a loaded question, because I think it's very dependent on the kid, their athleticism, I would say, their ability to heal. I've seen it happen in some kids, and I've seen it be the end of career in some other kids. But having multi-trauma to the same joint, yeah, I mean, that predisposes you. Any kind of intra-articular inside the joint damage is just going to predispose you to later joint damage. That's pretty well known. But I think there's more factors that go into it person by person.
I think that's probably more of a psychological question than it is a physical question, because I'm telling you, I've never seen patients more sad, more. It's heartbreaking to see a kid that is 15 that is now had 2 ACL tears in 10 and a half months. Like it's heartbreaking, and that mentally, that is hard to come back from. It doesn't matter if you're 15 or you're 40. That is hard to come back from.
Okay, we've spent 30-something minutes talking about injuries and annoying things and sad things and things that make us worry about our kids. So I don't want to leave this episode on a downer. I always like to try to end on some type of encouragement. So as physical therapists, as doctors, how would you encourage parents as they walk through the fun yet super stressful period known as youth sports? What encouragement can you leave them with this week?
I think the most important thing is that you're making core memories. Your child is actively making core memories that they're going to remember for the rest of their life, and they're going to talk about with their boys at Chili's when they're 50. And so I think making sure that
was such a specific reference.
I think making sure that they're having fun in that is so important, because it's going to affect their long term. I've had kids that are like, yeah, I injured my shoulder ice skating, and I never want to ice skate again. And I hate to see that happen. So I think just making sure that your kid is having fun in their sport is so important.
Yeah, so I have 2 babies, and they're not of sports age yet. But I've thought about this a lot as far as because in the coming years we're going to be playing sports, and what's the goal, right? And I don't have a goal for my kids to be high performers or for them to get scholarships, but what I want to get out of sports is for them to connect the fun and the joy of sports with the fun and the joy and the experience of human movement. So what I really want them to get is when the day comes when they hang up their cleats or they're not playing sports anymore, that they've got this instilled in them that human movement is great. It's fun. I want to move my body throughout my lifespan. I want to train in some capacity throughout life. So I don't want them to have this sour taste in their mouth of like, I know too many people that played college sports and then as soon as they were done, they're like, I'm never going to the gym again. I'm never doing this again, because they're so burnt out with that sport. And I really just want my kids to fall in love with human movement, because it's so good for them over their entire lifespan. And it's something that will serve them, their health, their family, for decades, if it's a positive experience. And that's really what I want for my kids.
That's so great. Guys, I love you so much, but I hope I don't see you anytime soon.
Same.
Thanks for being
Same.
on today with us. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Absolutely.
That's it for today's episode. If you like the show, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, it'd be a huge help for you to write up a small review. On Spotify, you can leave us a rating there as well. If you're on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button on the video today. If this episode has helped you in any way, the best way you can help us grow the show is sharing this episode with a friend. Most of all, we hope you have an incredible week watching your kids play the sport they love. Have a great week, everybody.